April 29, 1945. Bavaria. The war is almost over, but the men of the U.S. 45th Infantry Division don't feel victory in the air. They feel exhaustion, the weight of 1,000 miles of mud, blood, and fire. Ahead, the gates of Dachau swing open with a groan like iron being dragged through stone. The hinges scream, and beyond them lies silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of something unnatural. The first sight is not a prisoner, not a guard, not even a building. It's a train. Dozens of boxcars stretch along the tracks like a rusted spine. The stench hits before the soldiers get close. A sweet, rotting odor that clings to their throats, forcing some to gag. When the first door is pulled open, rifles instinctively rise, but there are no enemies inside. Only bodies. Piled so tightly they resemble cordwood stacked for winter. Skin stretched waxy and thin. Eyes glazed, staring out of darkness. Some clutch scraps of paper, photographs, shoes. Others have nothing at all. One GI stumbles backward, covering his mouth, muttering, "Dear God." Another vomits into the dirt. A few just stand frozen, unable to blink, unable to move. The war has shown them battlefields, artillery, and death by the thousands. But this is different. This is not combat. This is slaughter. The camera of history pans wider. More cars. More corpses. The number grows until it's no longer possible to count. The ground itself seems poisoned by death. And just beyond the tracks, through the haze of smoke drifting from unseen chimneys, the barbed wire fences of Dachau stretch into the distance. For a long moment, the men don't speak. The rifles in their hands feel suddenly useless. Because what they are looking at isn't an enemy position or a target. It's proof. Proof of a crime so vast the world itself feels smaller standing in its shadow. The gates yawn wider. The soldiers steel themselves and step forward. Dachau has been opened. And nothing will ever be the same. The men of the 45th push past the train yard, boots crunching on gravel and glass. The air grows heavier with every step, the smell of decay mixing with coal smoke that drifts lazily from the chimneys ahead. The camp reveals itself slowly, like a wound being unwrapped. Wooden barracks lean under their own weight, roofs sagging, walls flaking, windows blackened with soot. At first, there was no movement. Just rows of fences, towers looming like silent sentries, and the echo of boots on stone. Then, from the shadows, figures emerge. Striped uniforms hang off frames so thin they hardly look human. Skin stretched over bone. Faces hollowed, eyes sunken deep into sockets. Some walk on trembling legs. Others crawl. A few collapse the moment they see the Americans, too weak to hold themselves upright. One prisoner, ribs protruding like a cage, raises his arm in a salute before falling face first into the dust. A medic rushes forward, but it's already too late. His body twitches once and then lies still. Another prisoner grips the bars of the fence with skeletal hands, trying to speak. No sound comes out, just a dry rasp. The soldiers stare, caught between horror and pity, unable to process the living dead standing before them. And then, movement at the far side of the yard. Black uniforms. Waffen-SS guards. Dozens of them, standing in formation near the coal yard, their hands raised. Their weapons are gone, but their posture is not surrender. Some glance at the prisoners with cold detachment. One smirks. Another straightens his collar, as if preparing for inspection. They are calm, untouched by hunger, untouched by guilt. The contrast is unbearable. On one side, men who have been starved into shadows of humanity. On the other, their tormentors, well-fed, standing tall, arrogance etched into their faces. The Americans grip their rifles tighter. In their ears, the low moans of the prisoners blend with the hiss of smoke from the ovens. For the men of the 45th, it is clear, Dachau is not a battlefield. It is a factory of death. And the men in black uniforms are the ones who ran it. The line between restraint and rage snaps in an instant. The prisoners, frail and skeletal, point toward the guards. Fingers trembling, voices hoarse, but the message is clear. These are the men. The ones who beat them. The ones who starved them. The ones who drove them into the boxcars. An old man, shaking so violently he can barely stand, spits in the dirt at the sight of a guard adjusting his cap. No words are needed. The truth radiates from every prisoner's stare. Lieutenant William Walsh, his uniform dusted with ash and dried blood, scans the scene. He looks at the prisoners, then at the guards. Their faces are blank, calm, some even defiant. He doesn't shout. Doesn't lecture. Just two words, spoken low enough that only the men nearest can hear. Line them. The order spreads like fire. Guards are marched to the wall by the coal yard, boots scuffing on stone, their eyes steady. Rifles rise. Fingers tighten. No bugle. No command. Just silence heavy enough to crush the air. Then, the machine gun barks. The first burst slams into the line, bodies jerking back, blood painting the wall behind them. M1 Garand's follow, crisp cracks echoing in succession. A pistol shot snaps like a whip. For 30 seconds, the yard is alive with gunfire, bullets stitching men into the stone until the entire row collapses in a heap. When the smoke clears, some twitch. Most don't. Steam rises from the blood pooling in the dirt. The guards who once smirked now lie broken, their faces pressed into gravel. The soldiers don't cheer. They reload. Not because they are ordered, but because something inside them demands it. They've seen the train. They've smelled the chimneys. They've watched men collapse at their feet. Liberation is no longer enough. Dachau is not just being freed. It is being avenged. If the executions at the wall had left even a shred of doubt, what came next burned it away forever. Beyond the gates, deeper into Dachau, the Americans uncovered what words could barely capture. Piles of emaciated corpses stacked like cordwood. Naked, skeletal, eyes frozen open in silent screams. The stench was so thick it seemed to crawl down their throats, clinging to their uniforms, embedding itself in their lungs. Inside the barracks, survivors stumbled forward, shadows of men who should have been dead. Some wept openly. Others simply touched the soldiers' hands as if to confirm they were real. A medic dropped his kit when a prisoner tugged at his sleeve, pulling him to a pile of rags that turned out to be a woman, still breathing, bones jutting through gray skin. The Americans tried to help, but every step revealed more proof of industrial slaughter. The crematoria glowed faintly warm, ash clinging to the brick. Metal stretchers lined the ovens, slick with blackened residue. In the train yard, boxcars brimmed with bodies, their faces contorted, lips cracked, some gnawed where men had bitten flesh in starvation's final throes. Every soldier who walked through that place felt something fracture. Tears mixed with curses. Some vomited. Some staggered out into the daylight, fists trembling, only to see SS men. Still alive in the yard, smoking, smirking, as if the camp were merely abandoned property. The evidence was not just seen. It was absorbed. The train. The ovens. The corpses. They screamed louder than any order, louder than any regulation. One private muttered, voice breaking, "They don't deserve a trial." Not one of them. And in that moment, a silent consensus formed among the men. Dachau would not wait for judges or lawyers. Justice, brutal and immediate, would come from the barrels of their guns. The massacre was no longer an accident of rage. It was becoming a mission. The executions at the wall had been swift, controlled, almost surgical. But what followed inside Dachau was chaos, vengeance with no commander, no order, no restraint. The guards were everywhere, in towers, in barracks, huddled against walls. Some had dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Others tried to melt into the crowd, stripping insignias from their collars. But the prisoners knew them, pointed them out, dragged them forward with skeletal arms and broken voices. A machine gun company was set up in the yard. When a group of captured SS was herded together, the barrels swung and spat fury, cutting them down where they stood. Some fell instantly. Others stumbled, clutching wounds, crawling in circles until a rifle round finished them. Elsewhere, soldiers went room to room, dragging guards into the open. A sergeant cracked a man's skull with the butt of his rifle, then turned the weapon and emptied a clip into his chest. Another officer barked at his men to round them up, but by the time the words left his lips, his squad had already fired. It wasn't only Americans. Prisoners who had endured years of torment now saw their tormentors helpless. They pounced with fists, sticks, shovels, and teeth. One prisoner, no heavier than a child, clutched a rock and beat a guard's face until it was unrecognizable. Another dragged a man by the hair into the mud, stomping his head until it gave way. The soldiers did nothing to stop it. Some even turned their eyes away, as if to grant the victims their revenge. Shouts of "No mercy" echoed over the gunfire. Bullets punched into walls, into bodies, into the earth. Blood ran in channels through the camp gutters. Guards screamed for mercy, clutching at boots, only to be kicked back into the mud before a shot silenced them. In one corner, a soldier leaned against a wall, trembling, whispering to himself, "This isn't war anymore, this is something else." But war had left Dachau long ago. What unfolded now was not combat. It was judgment. Brutal. Unchecked. Final. By nightfall, the camp was liberated. But liberation came drenched in blood. The guards of Dachau executed not in courtrooms, but in mud, brick, and smoke. By dusk, the smoke had thinned, and silence settled over Dachau, not the silence of peace, but of exhaustion, of death. The ground was slick with blood. The walls are scarred with bullet holes. Piles of SS uniforms lay in the dirt, their wearers crumpled where they had fallen. The soldiers stood among the wreckage, rifles lowered, fingers still trembling. Some stared at their boots, unwilling to meet one another's eyes. Others lit cigarettes with shaking hands, the smoke masking the stench of bodies. No cheers rose, no victory songs were sung. What had happened was not a triumph. It was a release, raw, uncontrolled, irreversible. Prisoners wandered the camp, some in stunned disbelief, others weeping openly. A group of survivors huddled near the crematoria, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers of thanks. Yet for every prayer, there was also a scream. A man wailed over the body of an SS officer he had killed with his bare hands. Another, gaunt and hollow-eyed, laughed hysterically until a soldier dragged him away. American officers soon arrived, their faces pale as they surveyed the scene. Reports were demanded. Questions barked. But the answers were vague, the details blurred. Who gave the orders? Who fired first? Who decided where justice ended and vengeance began? No one could say. Perhaps no one wanted to. Still, the truth could not be ignored. Dozens of executed guards lay in the mud, stripped of dignity, stripped of life. The massacre was undeniable. And yet, so was the horror of the camp itself. The ovens. The train cars. The corpses stacked like lumber. Could any court-martial erase those sights? Could any reprimand silence the cries of the men who had seen them? For the soldiers, a shadow now hung over their victory. They had liberated Dachau, yes. But in doing so, they had crossed a line that blurred the difference between justice and revenge. Night fell over the camp. Fires smoldered in the crematoria. The survivors whispered about freedom. And the soldiers sat in silence, each man left to wrestle with the truth. At Dachau, they had freed the oppressed, and become executioners themselves. Word of what happened spread quickly through the chain of command. Reports of irregularities during the liberation reached headquarters before the smoke had even cleared. Eyewitness accounts conflicted, some spoke of prisoners exacting their own revenge, others of American soldiers lining up guards and mowing them down. The numbers varied. 24, 50, 100. But all agreed, the executions were real. General George S. Patton, later tasked with reviewing the events, called the reports exaggerated. Official statements leaned toward restraint, painting the killings as spontaneous acts by enraged prisoners, not disciplined U.S. troops. Files were marked classified. Investigations quietly folded. The massacre, though whispered among veterans, was buried beneath the tide of victory sweeping across Europe. And yet, not every soldier could bury what he had seen. Some wrote in journals. Others confessed years later in interviews, voices heavy with the weight of memory. They remembered the look in the eyes of the guards, some smug, others resigned, before the barrels erupted. They remembered the cheers and sobs of prisoners as vengeance was carried out in real time. And they remembered the silence afterward, heavier than any gunfire. For the survivors, there was little moral questioning. To them, justice had finally been delivered. The men who had starved them, beaten them, and driven them into the boxcars had met the fate they deserved. But for the Americans, trained to fight as soldiers under rules of war, Dachau was a haunting reminder that even liberators were not immune to the pull of rage. Historians would later debate, was it a massacre, or was it justice? Did the Americans dishonor their victory, or did they simply carry out the verdict that history itself demanded? The truth lay somewhere in between, in that gray space where morality shatters under the weight of atrocity. Dachau had revealed the darkest depths of human cruelty. And in answering it, the liberators had revealed how thin the line truly was between justice and vengeance. Decades have passed since that April day, but the echoes of Dachau still resound. The liberation is remembered as a moment of salvation, when thousands of prisoners saw the gates burst open and the nightmare of the camp finally ended. Yet woven into that memory is a darker thread, the blood of the SS guards who met their end not in courtrooms, but in the mud and walls of the very camp they had ruled. For some, the massacre has been framed as justice raw and immediate, a mirror held up to men who had abandoned all humanity. They argue that no trial could equal the cries of those skeletal survivors, no verdict could match the ovens or the train cars full of corpses. To them, the bullets fired at Dachau were history's own judgment. But others warn that what happened there was a warning in itself, that even the victors, even the liberators, could be swept into the storm of vengeance. They point to Dachau not just as evidence of Nazi barbarity, but as proof of how easily rage can eclipse discipline, and how quickly soldiers can cross the line from warriors to executioners. Today, at the Dachau Memorial Site, visitors walk the same grounds where those events unfolded. They see the ovens, the barracks, the guard towers. And in quiet corners, they learn of the massacre, not to condemn or absolve, but to remember. To remember the horror that provoked it. To remember the vengeance it unleashed. And to remember the fragile boundary between justice and revenge. The Dachau Massacre stands as a haunting paradox. It was liberation, and it was execution. It was victory, and it was bloodshed. It was the moment when American soldiers ended a nightmare, and in doing so, created one of their own. History does not offer easy answers. Only echoes. And Dachau's echo still asks the question, when faced with unimaginable evil, how far can justice go before it becomes vengeance?